drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with actionable tips to transform your marketing game? You're in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jenn Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. Reaching global audiences has never been more possible, but also never been more complex. The old saying that we're all connected by 6 degrees of separation has evolved to being separated by 6 pixels. To explore this concept and how businesses can leverage it, I'm thrilled to welcome Mitch Joel, co-founder of ThinkersOne and author of 6 Pixels of Separation. Mitch has been called a marketing and communications visionary, helping businesses understand how to thrive. Welcome to the show, Mitch.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jen. I'm going to apologize. In my office, they are doing renovations. Hopefully you won't hear all the pounding. I jokingly said that it's not the sound of me pounding my head against the walls with how challenging it is to be a marketer today. So,
well, hopefully we will leave that up to the construction workers for this conversation, but we will power through. So tell me, your book, 6 Pixels of Separation, introduced this really interesting and powerful concept. Can you explain how digital connectivity has changed the traditional 6 degrees theory and what that means for businesses today?
Yeah, I mean, it's always fun in 2025 to talk about that book because it came out over a decade ago.
Wow.
And it's funny because the name of it was actually, in fairness, one of our junior copywriters at the time in the early 2000s, myself, along with 3 other business partners, started a digital marketing agency. So it was around 2000. So very early days for that. And I had a background in journalism and publishing. And I really loved the idea of using those tools to connect to a bigger audience. And so what I realized is I can now not just use these tools that I would hope brands would jump onto and try to engage with. And again, very early days, as most brands were not doing this, but set it as a table for how you can almost like dog food it. By doing it, you can show that it works. And so we started off at the time, the agency was called Twist Image, and it was the Twist Image blog. And this is, again, 2002, 2003. And then I started podcasting very shortly thereafter. And then as I was invited to speak more and talk about these ideas of digital media and what it's going to mean, one of our copywriters came up with this title of 6 Pixels of Separation. And I was head over heels with the idea because we all know the idea of 6 degrees of separation or 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, that none of us are more than 6 degrees away from Kevin Bacon. And what became abundantly clear to me, not just from the brand's ability to think differently about marketing, but even as individuals, is that suddenly in text, images, audio, and video, short form, long form, live, recorded, however you wanted to do it, you could now be connected to anyone, anywhere. And at the time, it really was free. You know, most of the platforms now, there is expense to doing it, but back in the early 2000s, you know, have computer, off you go, and you could have a global audience back when things actually went viral and things like that. And I think one of the big profound learnings from my side was just the ability for brands to think like that suddenly you can be connected to everybody. Now, again, we say that now, we think it's such a great thing, but back then brands were very hesitant. When they did marketing or communications, it was a form of broadcasting. It wasn't even seen as a one-to-one or an opportunity to connect that way. Most of them, even that had robust database marketing strategies, was mostly around direct marketing. And so again, this idea that if someone's looking for content in your area through a search engine, that you could target advertising towards them. Now it seems very pedantic, and of course we all do this, but back then it wasn't. And so what I would say now, if I can be retrospective, 25 years later, and thinking about this idea of 6 pixels of separation, is that I think a lot of it still stands, which is the interest in people wanting to talk and have these communications. But I also think a lot of it was surprisingly radical in how wrong I was in terms of thinking, hey, if we're all connected, how great would that be? And suddenly what we see is actually we can be very crappy to one another. We can be very isolationist. It can be very political. It can be very dangerous. And so there is that part of it that's a reality that I think I was too Pollyanna to see because of my excitement for what it meant to marketing. But at the same time, I would still argue that overall, if I look at the landscape today, you don't see a brand not thinking about how to have a more one-to-one connection with their customer.
Absolutely. You sort of like pre-answered a question that I was thinking as you were talking, like what has changed? If this concept is 20 years old, the book is 10 years old, what's changed? And I don't think it's unique to you that we all sort of thought that this connectivity was going to be just 100% positive thing for society and the world and
Yeah.
people and brands and everything. And it actually has come with some challenges. Maybe even having an impact on how we connect, not in the digital world, right? Like, but so I'm curious to see, like, to hear how you would, how you think about this differently today, and this concept of 6 pixels of separation. Like, what remains? What is still kind of working and important about it, and what do we need to look out for?
I think ultimately the core idea has remained the same. The dramatic change is that it is all essentially now paid media as well, which is surprising. The bifurcation at the time was this idea that you would have paid media to pay for attention to the audience. And on the other side, you would do this brand storytelling one-to-one through blogging, through podcasting, through videos, through audio, through images that would connect. And so you kind of had this world of like storytelling and free voice over here, and then paid media over here to support it. And you'd see how the balance worked out. Now I think that you have more storytelling and direct response, but both of those fall under paid media. Like, yes, you can produce content and put it on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, and you can build an audience. There's no doubt about it, but there's still a cost to do it. And I would even argue that if you started today, the likelihood of the content naturally going viral is probably next to nil. Like, you are still paying to expose people to that audience. You're paying to promote it. You're paying to amplify it. And so that layer of it all being paid media is something that I wasn't resistant to. I just wasn't comfortable saying it in relation to what we were doing on the storytelling side, because I thought it might poison it. That brands would intuitively think, well, then just make the stories like the ads, and then we don't need any of this. And I still don't believe that to be true. I think the storytelling component stands. The ability to connect humanely with an audience. You're seeing great brands do that. But the fact that you still have to, it is still paid media, I think that's the layer that is very, very powerful. I'd also argue that the tech stack changed a lot of things and continues to change things, whether we're talking now about things like artificial intelligence or just seeing in the earlier days the involvement of trading desks and how people would buy media. I think marketplaces are another component that have really changed. And then the biggest change that I would say is in a world where I thought you would let 1,000 flowers blossom, and suddenly brands would be buying ads or speaking or sponsoring or funding influencers through all these channels. If you look at it, we kind of have 3 or 4 main media channels, just like we did in traditional media, which is a bit disappointing, but I still think enables brands to tell their stories through different channels.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So how should businesses be sort of rethinking their approach? Or maybe, maybe everybody's already doing this, or some are not. But how should they be thinking about their approach to reaching global audiences with everyone being so closely digitally connected and those channels kind of existing as they are?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends always. I don't think there's like this one answer of like every business does this. I think B2B is still slightly different from B2C. I think small, medium, large businesses should operate differently. I think if it's entrepreneur-led versus charitable, nonprofit, there's different approaches to think about. But ultimately, what I believe you're trying to do is figure out one of two things. Do we have the ability to create these unique voices? Do we have a talking head, a person who is compelling that can create this content? And or do we know the right people who can help us do this? So if you think locally, wherever you live, it doesn't really matter. There are a bunch of, we used to call them food bloggers. Now they're food influencers. Now they're TikTokers, whatever it might be. If you yourself are building a restaurant business in that city, if you have somebody who's compelling, who can create funny content, who's interesting, and there are examples of that here locally. There's one restaurant where the manager does this meeting with his team before the shift starts, and he is very captivating. I could tell he did some Tony Robbins training, like super interesting, and just showing behind the scenes and how he talks to his staff and how he's encouraging them to really care for the people who come to the restaurant. Like, it's very captivating and very powerful. At the same time, there may be somebody who's shy or doesn't have the resources to do it, but there are tons of local TikTokers who are great at talking about food that, for a minimal cost will either come in and actually create content for you, or just working with them to come in for special events to be actual influencers. So those are the layers that I think push this idea forward. I used to make the argument that ultimately everybody in every business should be some type of spokesperson in that more compelling and human and non-BS way. But I don't know anymore, in a world where you have so many, what we would call, I guess, micro influencers, or even bigger ones, who can really help you do this in a cost-effective way. And so that balance has changed a little bit for sure. And then I just also think that e-commerce has really democratized everything. So you could have made the argument, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, before COVID, that the local market that sells just, small store that sells some breads and fruits and sandwiches and salads, they don't need any type of e-commerce solution. But what they quickly realized during the pandemic is actually they did. So instead of taking orders through the phone and then shoving the food through the door so that no one got infected with this virus, a lot of them started hopping onto places like Shopify. And then what you see post-pandemic is, things like Uber Eats and other opportunities. All of that, I think, forced a new way to digitize and think about marketing and communications in a different way, providing services as an engine of marketing. And that, to me, has been the most interesting evolution. If you're even looking at a company like Apple, it's not about the pencils or the iPads or the laptops. It's about the services they provide. They're making a boatload of their revenue through services that they're offering, whether that's things like Apple Care or music or news or what have you. I believe that the new frontier of marketing for marketers, whether you're small, medium, large, is to figure out what are some additive services that we could provide that are actually engines of marketing to our core, but at the same time people would pay for, and that is still marketing. And it's marketing because not a day goes by that I don't open Apple Music or Apple News and think, oh, it's Apple Music and Apple News, and I'm paying for it a lot of money every year. And I think those are very, very powerful new ways that you could do marketing that you couldn't do in the earlier days of digital. You could, but it wasn't as predominant or as interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I feel like it's so connected to experience, right? That the marketing today is not solely about, hey, let me tell you about this great product we have that you want to buy, because there's so much competition and there's so much because we have access to everybody globally, digitally, everybody else does as well. So there's so much more competition for voice and for that story. So that experience that you're describing, the services that are added or the community that you create or whatever it is that you kind of build that is experiential and not just about a transaction. Yes. That's the difference between the brands that have a lot of success and the ones that, maybe are not the market leader. You could still be successful without creating this incredible brand experience, but that's the difference.
I'm nodding and smiling at the same time, because the big crescendo of my current marketing forward keynote is that services are the new experience. And what I mean by that is, when we as marketers think of experience, we think of going downtown or to the main street where you live and going into a t-shirt store and there's a DJ or a Frappuccino machine or something like that. That's the experience. And it's interesting to be in this place where it's like 25 years later from when I've been barking about this stuff, but most people's brand experiences happen on their phone. That is where it happens. And yet, if you think about it, we are still in a place where most businesses will develop for the web first and then mobile second. And I'm not saying every brand should go out and build an app. That's not what I'm saying. But if we know that the gateway is mobile, one, that's very interesting, that it's not just going to the website and doing all this stuff. It's just, that is my first impression. That is my experience. And then can we create like a DJ or a Frappuccino machine on a phone? Well, we can't. But what we can do is offer this idea of services. And even if your business is only a service business, I would argue that the win is to create services on top of your services. And so this is how my brain thinks about it. So physical spaces, the example is, there's a bank, I think it's in Poland, where the entire front of the bank, physical space, is like co-working. There's coffee machines, there's places to work, there's meetups, they do events. They turned what is the plastic plants and ropes and lines and frustration and broken pencils into a hub for the community, because that's who they're ultimately trying to connect to. And so that you can transpose, as we know, to digital. So a digital example of that would be Hot Wheels, the little toy cars that people buy. They have their own community for $9 or whatever dollars a month. I don't know what it is, but you get access where people who are more collectors can trade and talk about it. They can have previews to some of the stuff that's coming. They can have exclusive only products for them, but they're connected through the digital channel. And so again, this isn't anything necessarily revolutionary, but I think it is evolutionary in the sense of, we don't think of marketing now as, in particular, marketing is a curious word. A lot of times we're confusing marketing for advertising, right? Marketing is the 4 Ps. It's your product, price, promotion, your place. Most of the time we talk about marketing, we're talking about a subset of one of the Ps, promotion, which is typically advertising. So in this space, if you think about it, marketing, you're thinking about a product. So now I have an online community for diehard Hot Wheels collectors. You're talking about the place of it. Well, obviously it's happening online. The price. So we have a pricing model around it where even though it's constant marketing, people are willing to pay for it because the value they're getting out of it. The promotion side of it, you can see how that works. And suddenly you're building an actual holistic marketing program through digital channels that is creating a much better experience. And I do think that the brands that are really strategic and thinking this through, not all brands can build community, not all brands can create compelling ads. But if you're thinking about it in this framework of, is this a add-on? Is it more value to the customer? And then when can I push this to the point where it's so valuable the customer would pay for it? I think that's the black belt level of marketing today.
Mm. Well, that is the sort of antithesis of it being paid media. Can we get our customers to pay us to market to them?
But there's even a second layer to that, which is if you look at some of the bigger e-commerce platforms, Best Buy would be an example of that, Walmart, they have their own media companies now, where if people are looking in specific areas, they're co-branding, they're sponsoring. If there's no search results for that or products for that, they will sell that space to somebody who can provide that service. They have the third-party marketplace. It's even like meta on top of that thought, which is suddenly you have e-commerce driven businesses that have media entities that aren't just for themselves, but they're providing that as a service to sometimes their competitors.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And the opportunities just then become sort of exponential. And that's, it feels very 6 degrees.
Or 6 pixels, yeah.
Of 6 pixels of separation. Exactly. So, you mentioned that it's really, I'm sorry.
I was going to say the dog is saying smarter things than the construction banging here, I guess.
There you go. Yeah, he, welcome to the show, Henrik. He, feels very strongly about this. So you were talking about, having a spokesperson and kind of having a face, but that it is harder to go viral organically, right? And, but is that even still the goal? Or what? Organic isn't gone, right? It's certainly a thing. What's the goal around organic if, really that virality is coming from these paid channels?
So look, we can go down this conversation of what is unique and different and how it's always changing, or we can go down a more pragmatic perspective, which is, what are we doing here? We're trying to sell more product to more people. We're trying to make sure that when they buy the product, that they become a customer. My friend Avinash Kaushik, who used to be the Google Analytics evangelist and now is often doing his own agency stuff, he would say that a customer is someone who buys from you twice, not just once. And
Mhm.
ultimately, what you're trying to have that person do once they bought from you twice is be connected and at the same time tell other people that this is worth your time and attention. And so if we said that, it's kind of hard to argue that anything has changed. What has changed is maybe the ways in which we have the places, the ways in which we promote it, maybe the ways in which we even price it too. Possible is worthy of a debate and conversation. So ultimately, I could make the argument that nothing has really changed. We have something, we want to get attention on it, we want people to buy it, we want them to be somewhat loyal to it, and we want them to tell others that it's great. And that's the role. And so how we use that is just more powerful. Meaning, if you think about what is still the difference between what was then and what is now, it's what Seth Godin would call the gatekeepers. Before, if I wanted to build an audience, I had to essentially disrupt someone else's audience with some form of paid relationship. And so you were really paying for access to an audience which could give you attention. And again, the paradigm shift in the early 2000s through blogging and podcasting and everything we see now today in 2025 is the fact that there are no more gatekeepers. We could argue that the gatekeepers came back. You have your Googles, your Metas, and all those. But that gatekeeping, I feel, is more against promoting, paying. Like, yes, there's the whole advertising side of it, but you're right that you can still build an audience. Would I build an audience solely in a platform like YouTube or TikTok? I would not. I think it's much better to try and build one that is directly connected to you through capturing emails or building a channel where you might be using YouTube as the distribution place to put the video, but ultimately people are finding out about how to go to YouTube through you. Mm-hmm. But even those are still aspects of paid, right? Meaning if you wanted to start a real YouTube channel today, you would have to pay to build that audience. If you did it purely organically, it might work, it could work, but the odds of it working based off of the fact that you can spend a minor budget to at least expose an audience to it to get that attention, it's kind of hard to argue that it's not paid.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting, and it makes sense. Like, it's there's a lot that needs to go into it today. It's and you're right. You could do it. You could do it completely organically, but it might take ages. Or it might
they're videos people shoot on their phone and they post it on TikTok, and it goes extremely viral. Sure. I would argue that things go viral now multiple times a day. And you don't see it have the longevity that other viral things had, where it was weeks and weeks, or something unique to the platform that you were able to capitalize on in terms of growing audience and beyond. You can still do that organically, but we don't know when that's going to happen or how that happens. People would argue that you can. I'm not sure that you can. And so what happens is you wind up spending a lot of time, attention, and energy on creating a lot of content and hoping that something breaks through, or that the aggregate of it over time works. I've been doing my podcast, 6 Pixels of Separation, for almost 20 years. It's crazy. It's every Sunday. It's an hour long where it's similar conversation with a brilliant mind that I get to corner and ask about the book they wrote or some theories that they're working on. And it is the slowest of slow burns. I'm sure there are many things I could do to pay to create the bigger audience. Haven't done that. I might in the future, but it is a slow burn. And the way I look at it is it's not trying to go viral. In a certain way, it's a very selfish act. It keeps me sharp. It keeps me interested. And it helps me be better in terms of my keynotes and my investing and what I'm doing with ThinkersOne and beyond. And the output of that is other people can come along for the ride. Yeah. But if I were thinking about it more strategically as a media property to generate revenue, it would be a completely different approach.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Tell me, what do you think are some of the common mistakes that you see companies making when they're trying to expand their reach or create these digital experiences? Like, where do companies go wrong?
I would make the argument that the fundamental place it's failing, and it's failing the vast majority of time, is in the story and in how the story is told.
Interesting.
If I said to you, Jen, like, what was the coolest ad you saw in the Super Bowl last year? What would you say? I'm not going to put you on the spot, because the answer is it doesn't really matter what you say in a sense. But most people, when they hear that question, are like, I couldn't even tell you the past couple of years. Or sometimes they'll tell you what the story was and not even remember the brand connection to it. Yeah. And it's not about the Super Bowl or how much is paid to advertise on the Super Bowl. It's an indictment on the industry that you and I have done very well in, unfortunately, which is there are thousands and thousands of people who are creating some type of media advertising content, whatever it might be, every single day. And with that, people are paying for it. Hundreds of millions, if not billions, actually, billions of dollars for that. And the vast majority of it doesn't actually break through, that it's not memorable, that it doesn't do much. And I do feel that that is an indictment, not on the fact that there's nobody that's interested. We know that if you can captivate someone's attention, you're seeing podcasts these days get 3-4 hours a day. And people, it's the number one podcast, right? Joe Rogan, we can't, whether you like him or don't like him, it's irrelevant. It's the number one podcast, and people spend 3 hours watching that because it's compelling storytelling for that audience. So when I think about, like, if I were starting off now, what is valuable? What is actually resonating? How does this really help them, them being the customer, move along? And if I were to be honest, the vast majority of things our entire industry is putting out is noise, and it's not resonating, and it's not working. And it's the only industry that I can think of where someone would say, here's $1 million, and you come back and go, it didn't work, but you still have to pay me. So when we talk about, like, what is it? Sorry to be a bummer in the end of this conversation. It's an indictment on us that not only should we do better, we need to educate better, both the clients and our team members, so that we have a real vision for, not does this solve a problem? People don't want their problem solved. They want to know that there's somebody along with them, guiding, adding value, making the journey interesting. So all too often we put ourselves as the brand, as the hero, when in reality what we are is, I think Donald Miller says it best in his brand story work, where, everybody acts like they're Luke Skywalker, but in theory they should be acting like they're Yoda as a brand. And we don't do that. And it's even that thinking, and other brilliant thinkers have had me rethink how I communicate and connect. And it's not easy, but that would be the biggest problem. The biggest problem is you're going to probably spend a lot of money, and it's not going to have great result. And so before you spend that money, get really clear on where you're adding value, how clear and simple you tell that message, what makes it unique, why you, and then start building from there.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of Donald Miller, and the story brand framework is one that I follow. And I think that you're exactly right, that there is, with brand storytelling, you kind of have to strike this balance in this digital world of entertaining content that sells stuff. So that pendulum is always sort of swinging. You were talking about the Super Bowl ads. You swing too far on the entertaining side, and nobody knows what brand.
Yeah, what makes the calculus the craziest is the fact that it's one thing to say that and then be like, it's really expensive and it's hard and you're competing for a slot somewhere. We're adding in the fact that anyone, anywhere right now can create something in text, images, audio, video, short form, long form, go live with it, record it, edit it, clean it up, and instantly distribute it to some type of global platform. Like, you could argue that I don't reach everybody when I post on Instagram, but the truth is it could. Meaning if something is really compelling, it can go viral. I mean, it is possible. It's not impossible. Yeah. And that's the other part of the calculus that should bake your noodle if you're a marketer. That not only is it ineffective and not working, it's the fact that you have the ability, you have unlimited tools, you have an unlimited canvas with unlimited distribution to do this. There's nothing blocking you other than that first part.
Right, for sure.
Which is huge, but yeah.
It is huge. And then on the flip side of it, the sort of like, if you're focused too much on being Luke Skywalker, and let me tell you how great we are as a brand or a product or a company, nobody cares, because you're missing that piece of the value that you add that you talked about.
I think you can actually get there. I do think there's something in the influence sphere around transcending. I do think that is possible. If you do everything right, suddenly you will become Luke Skywalker. Like the student will become the teacher if it's done really well. Like, I don't think Mr. Beast, as an example, he's Luke Skywalker, and you go to him because he's Luke Skywalker. Sure. So that's the other nuance of this, where yes, in the early days as you're establishing and building, you want to be that person. But ultimately, if you actually succeed and do it well in terms of the storytelling content side, you could.
Yeah.
You could become in and of yourself the influencer, the gateway, the person that you go to, which is an interesting dynamic.
You just can't skip that step of telling that story.
Yeah, because you have to build audience. You have to build more than audience, a community, a sense of people wanting to commune with you. So people would say to me, AI is coming, we're all digital now. People are doing work from home. It's hybrid. It's all true. But I would still argue that as humans, we have an innate desire to commune. And if you wanted to make yourself as a marketer or as even an individual professional future-proof, the way to make yourself future-proof is to live and breathe in the spaces of communing. Where do people gather? It can be physical, for sure. Physical is great. It can be digital. That's great too. But figuring out how to be not just a person who's communing, but the hub of which people commune to, I think is something that AI won't be able to do. I don't think it's something that all your data and analytics can do. It becomes a physical, virtual philosophy of who you are. And again, not saying I did it right or wrong, but philosophically, my entire career has been about how can I expand the network of people that I commune with. And whether that's through the podcast or whether that's through speaking at events or whether that's through ThinkersOne and making other thought leaders accessible to other types of businesses, whatever it might be, that's what the anchor is how can I create spaces for people to come together? And again, the crux for me is always, I want to make you better after you've interacted with content with me or whatever than you were before. I am not trying to impress you or impress upon you how smart I am. I see my role more like a journalist where I'm trying to help you understand and be able to act on something after you engage with it that you couldn't before. And I think that's also a big difference between a lot of brands today. A lot of brands today are just trying to impress you.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's talk about that. How do you, as a brand, how do you build trust? How do you establish credibility and authentic connection without, I'm trying to impress you or convince you of something across these sort of digital spaces and cultural and geographic bounds?
I think it's just natural that if you're trying to impress, by trying to impress, you're going to overdo it. You're going to try to pin the person down and explain to them all the things that they don't know or da, 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 da. Again, back to storytelling, thinking like a journalist, I am always coming at it from the perspective of, if I post this, even if it's on LinkedIn or Instagram, will the person who's consuming this be better for themselves, not more informed about me and my products? And I know that the more I can do that, the more people would say things like, who is Mitch? What is 6 pixels of separation? What is ThinkersOne? Should I go back and read, Control Alt Delete, also, 10 plus years old. It's probably way more than that if I really think about it. But the truth is that I believe in that constantly flowing out value creates a platform by which people might say, oh, we're pulling together our customer summit in 6 months. Who would be an interesting voice to hear? And someone goes, I got this Mitch Joel guy in my LinkedIn feed, and he's super interesting. And maybe it's not him. Maybe it's some of the thought leaders on ThinkersOne that we could integrate into the event, whatever it might be. And that to me is the ultimate check mark. It's very flattering to have conversations like this when I'm doing my show and someone says to me, oh, like no one's ever asked me that. And it's flattering, and it's I'm human. It gets to me. It makes me feel like, oh, that's kind of cool. But I know as I'm having that conversation, I'm still thinking like the journalist and storyteller, where is this giving value to the person who just spent an hour with me? If you use that as your guiding light, that to me is the easiest place to start, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, if you come from a place of trying to be useful and helpful and, like you say, add value, then people will want to connect with you and want to learn more and have that question of, like you said, who is this person? Do I need to talk to them more?
Yeah, or even like, how many YouTubers do I follow where I'm not in the space? Like, I'm not interested. I'm not going to be collecting toys or playing electric bass, but I like those things. And the content they're providing, I just find interesting. and I'd rather spend a little bit of time with it. And so if someone came to me and said, hey, I'm thinking about getting into toy collecting, what should I do? Oh, follow that person or buy from this person. So it makes it really easy when that person is authentically creating value. And the way I think they think about it, and if not, I hope they do, is they're not thinking about creating value that comes back to their business. They're thinking about creating value that expands the discernible audience of the industry. And that's also a very unique perspective to take, where you're not constantly batting people over the head with features and benefits. Right. You're actually trying to build the industry. And historically, the brands that have done that have been very successful at it. And by the way, that also comes with some type of ideation and creativity where they're doing something uniquely different and they're actually creating a new category. I'm also really passionate about that because, again, through storytelling and through compelling content, you can expand the industry too and not just be another competitor in the industry. I love that.
Yeah, I love that as well. Just to kind of wrap us all up in a bow, can we talk quickly about content and, what role different types of content plays? We've talked a lot about video content, right, and different channels, social channels, but what are some of the different content types and channels that we should be focusing on to, adapt the content strategy to a global audience?
So my general sentiment is I don't really care about that. What I care about is who in the brand has an expertise. How do they best express that expertise? So my running joke is, although we're doing video, I tend to like long form writing and long form audio conversations. That's my jam, listening to and creating. So I will default always to writing an article or doing some type of podcast with somebody and using that as my engine of content. Why? Because I know that I could never stop doing that, that it's what I would do, that if nobody was paying attention to my content, I would probably still communicate or express myself that way. So what am I saying? Look for the champion and then look for the format that they're great at. If you have somebody who's an incredible photographer, I would leverage that. I would leverage platforms that were more photo-based. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying ignore everything else and don't try other things, but start in the place where you have a domain of expertise or an unrecognized domain of expertise. And then I would counter that with the beauty of the world is, yes, it's very hard to say, you can't dismiss video. Of course, we know that. But the truth is that in whatever type, whether it's text, images, audio, video, all of the platforms have pretty interesting audience sizes, and they're also segmented in very dynamic ways. And by the way, even if not, start a newsletter, connectify people, build your Kevin Kelly 100 true fans, whatever it takes. But start seeing in the expertise of what you have around the table, can you exploit that and have people benefit from that content?
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. I tend to think about how people want to consume the content and how you can rework things to, make them, make it accessible for those people. But I love that you've sort of flipped it to think about the creator of the content and what format best suits them to create the most value.
So this is very common conversation that I have.
Yeah.
And I challenge back on it because I find that to be a very traditional media mindset of where is the audience? Okay. Like, I think there's audience everywhere. I think there's a real audience on Substack. I think there's still a real audience on X. I think there's a real audience in Instagram, on YouTube, on TikTok. I could go on and on. And also, by the way, I think there are real audiences in your newsletters and your subscribers and the people who will just come to your website. And so I don't necessarily care where the biggest audience is. I care about finding the group that would be most attracted to the things I want to share, because I'm like, why would anybody write a book? You write a book not because you have something original to say. I think most people write a book because they have a perspective on that topic. And what you're trying to do when you do that is you're writing the book you want to read. And then you have to have that mindset of, there must be others. I can't be alone in this thought. And by the way, if you are alone in the thought, then it's maybe not an original thought or good thought or worthwhile thought to pursue. But typically my experience, and it's way more than 25 years of just that aspect of it, I've been doing this since the late 80s, there's always an audience. And what I think digital really magnified is that even if you're in a very small niche, because of these 6 pixels of separation, that niche is usually very big and ever expanding.
I love that perspective. It is sort of a challenge to the way I typically think about it. So I love that. I'm going to think about that for the rest of the
Maybe
day.
beyond. We'll see, Jen. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe beyond,
knows, yeah.
for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mitch. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. I appreciate the time and I love the conversation. Thanks, Jen.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You can find Mitch on LinkedIn. His books, 6 Pixels of Separation and Control-Alt-Delete, are available wherever books are sold. Visit growgetter.io for more insights on B2B marketing strategy. And don't forget to subscribe to Marketing Demystified wherever